Homeless at 18, he inherited an abandoned vineyard, then found what changed his life. For anyone who has ever felt lost or been told their story was over before it even began, this is for you. If that's a feeling you know, maybe hit that subscribe button, because we're building a community for people who get it. Now, let's get into it. The day I turned 18 was the day I legally ceased to exist, at least as far as the state of California was concerned. There was no cake, there was no party, there was just a manila envelope, a final signature on a document I didn't read, and the institutional gray door of the group home clicking shut behind me for the last time. My worldly possessions were in a single black duffel bag slung over my shoulder. It wasn't heavy. 2 years of my life, 2 years of mandatory dinners and curfew checks and therapy sessions that felt more like interrogations, and it all amounted to less than 20 pounds of worn-out clothes and a dog-eared paperback. The air outside felt different, thinner. For 2 years, every breath I'd taken had been regulated, recycled through state-issue HVAC systems. This air, sharp with the exhaust of a morning bus and the faint, greasy promise of a nearby hot dog stand, was the air of a world that owed me nothing. And I owed it nothing in return. I walked the 7 blocks to the bus station, the cracked pavement a map of urban neglect. Every step was a conscious effort not to look back. There was nothing to look back at. Just a building full of kids who were counting down their own days to oblivion, supervised by adults who were just counting down the hours to the end of their shift. I bought a ticket to nowhere. That's not what it said on the printed slip, of course. It said San Francisco, because you had to pick a destination. But for me, it was just a name. A place to go where I wasn't from. I had $112 in my pocket, the last of the monthly stipend, and a $20 bill someone had left on the kitchen counter as a sad, anonymous birthday gift. $112 and a bus ticket. That was my inheritance from the system. I sat on a hard plastic bench, the duffel bag hugged to my chest like a shield. The station was a symphony of quiet desperation. People sleeping on their luggage, people talking into phones in hushed, urgent tones, people staring into the middle distance with the same hollow look I was sure I had in my own eyes. I felt like a ghost, already gone from a place I'd never really been, on my way to a place I had no reason to go. The minutes stretched into an hour. My bus was delayed. Of course it was. The universe has a subtle, dry sense of humor when it comes to kicking you when you're down. I closed my eyes, trying to just breathe, trying not to think about the next 24 hours, the next week, the next year. It was a dark, swirling vortex, and if I looked too long, it would pull me under. My phone, a cheap prepaid model with a cracked screen, buzzed in my pocket. A number I didn't recognize. Probably a wrong number. I ignored it. It buzzed again, and a third time. Annoyance cut through the fog of my apathy. I pulled it out and answered, my voice rough. "Yeah?" "Am I speaking with Leo Martinez?" The voice was a woman's, crisp and professional. It sounded out of place, like a silk handkerchief in a greasy garage. "This is he," I said, my grammar a strange, formal echo of some long-forgotten English class. "My name is Eleanor Albright. I'm an attorney with the firm Albright, Finch and Associates. I'm calling regarding the estate of your grandfather, Mr. Arthur Vance." The name hit me like a stone skipping across a calm pond, a small disturbance from a past so distant it felt like someone else's memory. Arthur Vance, my mother's father, a man I'd met maybe twice, a phantom from my early childhood. He'd been a ghost story, a cautionary tale my mother would whisper about when she thought I wasn't listening. The man who walked away. The man who abandoned them. "I don't have a grandfather," I said, the words automatic, a defense mechanism built over a decade of unanswered questions. There was a pause on the other end. I could hear the faint rustle of paper. "According to our records, Mr. Vance passed away 3 weeks ago," she said, her tone softening slightly, a practiced professional sympathy. "He named you as the sole beneficiary of his will." I almost laughed. Beneficiary. Will. These were words from movies, from stories about rich families. They had no place in my life. "Look, you've got the wrong guy," I said, ready to hang up. "He didn't have anything. My mom said he died broke years ago." "That is not entirely accurate," Ms. Albright replied, her voice steady. "While the estate is not substantial in liquid assets, it does include a piece of real property, a parcel of land with a residence. In accordance with the will, which was contingent upon you reaching the age of legal majority, it is now yours." The words just hung there in the noisy air of the bus station. A parcel of land, a residence, a home. It was so absurd, so completely out of left field, that I couldn't process it. "Where?" I asked, the single word a small, shaky boat in a sea of confusion. "It's in Navarro County," she said, "a small town called Harmony Creek. The property is approximately 40 acres, a former vineyard. The will is quite clear, Mr. Martinez. It's yours. We need to schedule a meeting to go over the transfer of title and other legal necessities." I leaned my head back against the grimy wall of the station. A former vineyard, 40 acres. It sounded like a fairy tale. And in my experience, fairy tales always had a catch. A dark forest, a wicked witch, a hidden curse. "Is it worth anything?" I asked, the question feeling crass and small even as I said it. Another rustle of papers. "Candidly, Mr. Martinez, in its current state, its value is debatable. The property has been unattended for over a decade. The land is overgrown, the house is in a state of significant disrepair, and there are considerable back taxes owed. A developer, Apex Development, has a standing offer to purchase the land to clear the debt, but it's a lowball offer. Essentially, they'd be buying the debt." She paused. "I understand this is a lot to take in, especially today. I was instructed to contact you on your 18th birthday. That was a specific stipulation from your grandfather. A stipulation, a plan, from a man who was supposed to be a ghost. The announcement for my bus to San Francisco crackled over the PA system, a call to a future I had chosen out of pure desperation. And now, this. A call from a past I never knew, offering a different kind of desperation. A choice. I could get on that bus and disappear, or I could take a detour into the unknown. "Harmony Creek," I said, testing the name on my tongue. "How do I get there?" The bus ride to Harmony Creek was a journey through 3 different Californias. It started in the sprawling concrete maze of the Bay Area, a blur of traffic and glass towers that seemed to mock the $100 left in my pocket. I watched the faces on the street, people hurrying to jobs, to lunches, to lives of purpose, and I felt 1,000,000 miles away. I was just a boy in a dirty window, a reflection moving over a world I didn't belong to. Then the landscape began to change. The suburbs gave way to rolling golden hills, dotted with oak trees. The air that hissed through the window vents started to smell like dry grass and sun-baked earth. We passed through agricultural towns, their main streets lined with feed stores and taquerias. The passengers changed, too. The tech workers with their laptops were replaced by farmhands with calloused hands and tired eyes. Their Spanish, a soft, rhythmic murmur that filled the quiet spaces on the bus. I felt a little less like an alien here. Their exhaustion felt familiar. Finally, the bus turned off the main highway and onto a winding two-lane road that climbed into the coastal range. The hills became steeper, covered in dense forests of redwood and fir. Pockets of fog clung to the canyons, cool and damp. This was redwood country. The bus groaned as it navigated the switchbacks. My ears popped. It felt like we were ascending to another world, a place hidden away from everything else. The town of Harmony Creek wasn't so much a town as a brief interruption in the endless forest. A single main street with a handful of wooden storefronts. A general store with a rusty Coca-Cola sign. A diner with a faded "open" sign. A gas station with a single pump and a post office. That was it. The bus hissed to a stop in front of the general store, and the driver called out the name. I was the only one who got off. The bus pulled away, its red taillights disappearing around a bend, leaving me in a profound and intimidating silence. The air was cool and smelled of pine needles and damp earth. It was so quiet I could hear the buzz of a fly and the distant caw of a raven. I stood there on the side of the road with my duffel bag, a solitary figure in a landscape that felt ancient and indifferent. A pickup truck, old and battered, slowed as it passed me. The driver, a man with a weathered face and a gray beard, gave me a long, curious look before driving on. I was an anomaly here, a foreign object. Miss Albright had given me directions. The property is about 3 miles out of town, she'd said. Locals call it the old Vance place. You can't miss it. It's the last place on the road before it turns to dirt. 3 miles. I shifted the duffel bag on my shoulder and started walking. The road was cracked asphalt, patched in places, and it sloped gently uphill. The forest pressed in on both sides, giant redwoods filtering the afternoon sun into a dim, cathedral-like light. There were no other cars, no other people, just me and the sound of my own footsteps on the pavement. It was unnerving. In the city, you were surrounded by a shield of noise. Here, the silence made you feel exposed. After what felt like an eternity, the road passed a final, neat-looking farmhouse with a manicured lawn, and then the pavement ended abruptly. Before me was a dirt track, and to the left, a rusted metal gate hanging crookedly on one hinge. A faded wooden sign, half swallowed by ivy, was nailed to a post. I could just make out the letters, V-A-N-C-E. This was it. I pushed the gate open. It screamed in protest. The dirt driveway was more of a suggestion, 2 ruts disappearing into a jungle of weeds and overgrown bushes. I walked down it. The silence here even deeper, broken only by the crunch of my shoes on the gravel. And then I saw it. The house. It was a simple 2-story farmhouse, once painted white, now a patchwork of peeling paint and gray, weathered wood. The porch roof sagged dangerously in the middle. Windows were boarded up, and one was just a dark, gaping hole. To the right of the house, stretching up the slope of the hill, were rows and rows of what I assumed was the vineyard. But it wasn't green. It was a skeletal forest of gnarled gray wood, choked with weeds. It was dead. Everything was dead. My heart sank. Ms. Albright hadn't been exaggerating. The place was a ruin. A wave of despair washed over me, cold and heavy. This was a mistake, a cruel joke, a pile of rotting wood and dead plants on a forgotten hill. I should have stayed on the bus to San Francisco. I almost turned around right then. But where would I go? Back to the silent town? Back to the bus station? I had nowhere to go back to. This wreck was the only thing in the entire world that was mine. I took a deep breath, the pine-scented air doing little to calm the frantic beating in my chest. I walked up the creaking steps of the porch, avoiding the sagging middle, and stood before the front door. It was solid oak, scarred by weather, with a heavy iron handle. It was locked, of course. I walked around the house, my feet sinking into the soft, overgrown lawn. I found the back door. It was also locked. The gaping hole of the broken window on the side of the house seemed like the only way in. It felt wrong, like I was breaking into my own home. But I had no choice. I tossed my duffel bag through the opening, then carefully hoisted myself up and over the sill, dropping into the shadows within. I landed on the floor of what must have been the living room. The air inside was thick and musty, the smell of dust, decay, and trapped time. Thin beams of light cut through the gloom from cracks in the boarded-up windows, illuminating swirling dust motes. The room was furnished, but everything was draped in a ghostly layer of gray. A sofa and 2 armchairs sat like sleeping animals. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth filled with old, charred logs. A fine coat of dust covered every surface, a gray snow that had been falling for a decade. I ran a finger across a wooden mantelpiece, leaving a clean, dark streak. This was a place where life had simply stopped. I moved slowly, cautiously, my footsteps muffled by the dust. I went into the kitchen. The linoleum floor was cracked and peeling. A thick calendar on the wall was turned to July 2008, over 10 years ago. A coffee cup sat by the sink, a dark residue still at the bottom. It was profoundly creepy, like walking through a museum exhibit of a life abruptly ended. I opened the fridge. A puff of foul, sour air hit me. I slammed it shut immediately. Some things were better left undisturbed. I went upstairs. The steps groaned under my weight. There were 2 bedrooms. The first was small, empty except for a bare mattress on a metal frame. The second was larger, clearly the master bedroom. A large wooden bed, a dresser, a nightstand. This must have been his room, my grandfather's. I felt a strange mix of trespass and connection. I was standing in the room of a man I didn't know, a man who had shaped my life by his absence. I pulled open a drawer on the dresser. It was full of neatly folded shirts, all smelling of cedar and dust. Another drawer held socks, rolled into pairs. The man had been tidy. In the top drawer of the nightstand, under a yellowed copy of a local newspaper, I found it. It was a small, heavy box made of dark metal, about the size of a shoebox for a child's shoes. It was plain, unadorned, and had a small, sturdy lock. I shook it. Something slid inside, a soft, heavy thud. It wasn't a rattle, it was something solid. My heart started to beat a little faster. This felt different from the rest of the house. The rest of the house was abandonment. This was concealment. This was deliberate. I took the box downstairs and set it on the dusty dining room table. The lock was simple but strong. I had no key. I went back out the way I came, through the broken window, and searched the property for a shed. I found one behind the house, its door hanging off one hinge. Inside was a chaotic jumble of old gardening tools, rusted and covered in cobwebs. I found a heavy-duty screwdriver and a hammer. Back inside the house, I worked on the lock. It felt like another violation, forcing open something that was meant to stay shut. But I had to know. After a few minutes of prying and banging that echoed unnervingly in the silent house, the lock gave way with a sharp crack. I lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, were two items. The first was an old, tarnished brass key. It was ornate, the kind of key you see in old movies, for a chest or a roll-top desk. The second was a thick, cream-colored envelope. My name was written on the front in elegant, fading cursive. Leo. Just my name. My hand trembled as I picked it up. The paper was heavy, expensive. It was sealed with a wax stamp, an intricate design of a hawk. I broke the seal with my thumb and pulled out a sheaf of folded pages. The same cursive covered the pages, dense and neat. I sat down on a dusty chair, the metal box open on the table, and began to read. "My dearest Leo," the letter began. The words felt impossibly intimate. A direct address from a ghost. If you are reading this, it means two things. First, that I am gone, and second, that you have come home. I hope, against all odds, that you are not reading this in anger or bitterness, but I would understand if you are. The story you were told about me, the story your mother likely believed to the day she died, was that I abandoned you both. It is the great regret of my life that I let you believe that lie. But it was a lie I had to tell. It was a lie that kept you safe. I stopped reading, my breath caught in my throat. A lie that kept you safe. The words echoed in the silent room. I had carried the story of my grandfather's abandonment my entire life. It was a foundational truth, a piece of the broken architecture of my family. To hear it called a lie was like feeling the ground shift beneath my feet. I forced myself to continue reading, my eyes scanning the elegant script. "When your grandmother passed," he wrote, "she left me with this land, and with a significant debt I didn't know she had. It wasn't a bank loan. It was a private debt to a man who was dangerous. He had helped her buy the equipment for the vineyard years before, and the terms were predatory. After a few bad harvests, the debt spiraled. When I inherited it, he came to collect. His methods were not legal, and they were not kind. He saw your mother, and he saw you, a beautiful baby boy, and he saw leverage. I could feel a cold knot forming in my stomach. I thought of my mother, her perpetual anxiety, the way she would jump at loud noises, the way she always looked over her shoulder. I had always thought it was just her. But maybe she was seeing a shadow I couldn't. He made it clear, the letter went on, that if I didn't pay, he would use you both to ensure I did. I couldn't protect you, not while I was tied to you. The only way to keep his eyes off you was to sever the connection completely. I had to disappear from your life. I gave your mother all the money I had, told her I was leaving, and made her promise to never look for me. I told her I was a failure, a coward. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, breaking her heart to save her life, to save your life. I put the letter down, my hands shaking too much to hold it steady. I stood up and walked to the broken window, looking out at the skeletal remains of the vineyard. The dead vines looked like twisted monuments to his sacrifice. All these years, I had pictured him as a selfish man, a weak man who couldn't handle responsibility. But the man in this letter was someone else entirely. He was a man who had chosen a lonely exile to protect his family. He had chosen to be the villain in his own daughter's story so that she and I could have a chance at a life without fear. The grief was a physical thing, a sudden, crushing weight on my chest. Grief for my mother, who had lived and died believing she was abandoned. Grief for the grandfather I never got to know, and a strange, hot grief for myself, for the boy who grew up in the shadow of a lie. I leaned my forehead against the cool, grimy window frame, and I cried. I cried for the first time since my mother's funeral. I cried for the hollow ache of loneliness I had carried for so long. I cried for the waste of it all, the years of silence, the misunderstanding that had defined my entire existence. The sound of my own sobs was ugly and raw in the dead quiet of the house. After a long time, the tears subsided, leaving me empty and exhausted. I went back to the table and picked up the letter again. There was more. This land, Leo, is more than just dirt and dead vines. The man I owed the debt to is long gone, but the kind of greed he represented is not. A corporation, Apex Development, wants this land. They don't care about the vineyard. They care about the water rights that come with it. Harmony Creek runs through the back of this property, and they want to dam it, divert it for a luxury golf resort they plan to build down the valley. They will try to take this from you. They will offer you money. It will seem like a lot, especially to a young man starting out. But what they are buying is the future of this valley. My one hope is that by the time you read this, you will see what I see. Not a ruin, but a chance, a beginning. There is more for you to find here. The key in this box is the first step. Look to the heart of the house, the heart that kept us warm. The heart that kept us warm, the fireplace. I looked over at the huge stone fireplace in the living room. It was the centerpiece, the solid, unmoving core of the old house. The letter ended with a line that felt like a final, whispered plea across time. Don't let them erase us, Leo. Your grandmother's heart is in this soil. My hope is in your hands. Be brave. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. The house no longer felt creepy. It felt sad. It was a vessel of secrets, a silent witness to a tragedy I was only just beginning to understand. I picked up the heavy brass key. It felt warm in my hand, a tangible link to him, the heart of the house. I walked to the fireplace and began to search. Have you ever discovered a secret that completely changed the story of your life? One minute, you think you know who you are, where you come from, and why things are the way they are. The next, a letter, a photograph, a whispered confession from a relative, and your entire reality fractures. Everything you thought was solid turns to sand. It's a pain that's hard to describe. It's grief and anger and confusion, all rolled into one. You grieve for the truth you never knew, and you grieve for the lie you lived with for so long. For me, sitting there in that dusty house, I felt like the last 17 years of my life had been a film I was watching, and someone had just revealed that the main character, the villain I had built my identity around opposing, was actually the hero. It leaves you with nothing to stand on. If this is hitting a little too close to home for you, if you've ever had to rebuild your past from scratch, I want you to know you're not alone. This channel, this community, it's for people like us. People who know that the simplest stories are often the most complicated. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had a moment that just redefined everything. I read every single one, because these are the stories that matter. Now, let's get back to that fireplace. The fireplace was massive, built from large, smooth river stones. The mantelpiece was a thick slab of redwood, dark and heavy. I ran my hands over the cool stones, feeling for anything loose, any seam or crack that didn't look right. I checked the inside, sweeping away the old ash and soot with a piece of cardboard, looking for a hidden compartment in the floor of the hearth. Nothing. I went back to the letter. The heart that kept us warm. It was a fireplace. It had to be. But maybe I was being too literal. What is the heart of a fireplace? The fire itself. The heat. But there was no fire. I stood there, stumped, the heavy key feeling useless in my hand. I looked at the intricate pattern of the stones, the way they were fitted together. It was good work, solid. It was built to last. Then I noticed it. One stone, on the right side, about chest high. It was the same color and texture as the others, but the mortar around it had a slightly finer, hairline crack that the others didn't. It was almost invisible. I pressed on it. It didn't move. I pushed harder. Nothing. I tried to wedge my fingers into the crack, but it was too thin. Maybe the key wasn't for a lock. Maybe it was a tool. I examined the key again. The end of it, the part that goes into the lock, was complex, but the handle was a simple, solid loop of brass. I turned it around. The top of the loop was flat, worn smooth. I went back to the fireplace and looked at the stone. Near the bottom of the hairline crack, there was a tiny, almost imperceptible hole in the mortar, no bigger than the tip of a pen. It looked like a flaw, a tiny air bubble. On a hunch, I took the tip of the heavy brass key and inserted it into the hole. It slid in perfectly, a soft click echoing in the silence. It wasn't a lock, it was a release mechanism. I pushed. There was a low grinding sound, stone on stone, and the rock I had been looking at shifted inward by half an inch. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled the key out and worked my fingers into the gap I had created. The stone was heavy, but it pivoted inward on a hidden hinge, revealing a dark, rectangular cavity within the chimney structure. The air that came out was cool and dry. Reaching into the darkness, my fingers brushed against cold metal. I pulled it out. It was another box, larger than the first, a military-style ammunition can, painted olive drab. It was heavy. I carried it to the dining room table, my hands shaking again. There was no lock on this one, just two simple latches on the side. I flipped them open. The sound was loud in the silent house. I lifted the lid. I wasn't prepared for what I saw. The box was full of money, stacks and stacks of $100 bills bundled in paper bands. It wasn't new money. It was old, worn, the kind of cash that has been in circulation for a long time. I lifted one of the stacks. It felt impossibly real, impossibly heavy. I fanned through it. Underneath the money, there was a large, sealed manila envelope. I lifted it out and set it aside, my eyes still fixed on the cash. I started pulling the stacks out, laying them on the dusty table. There were dozens of them. I didn't even try to count it. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. More money than I could even imagine. This was life-changing money. This was get on a plane and never look back money. This was start a new life anywhere you want money. My grandfather's words echoed in my head. They will offer you money. It will seem like a lot. But this wasn't their money. This was his. He had saved this. For me. After I had laid all the cash out on the table, a small fortune sitting on a decade of dust, I picked up the manila envelope. It was thicker than the first one. I opened it. Inside were two things. The first was a thick bundle of documents held together with a rusty paperclip. Legal papers, geological surveys, water board reports, and pages of handwritten notes. It was his research, his ammunition for the fight against Apex development. It detailed their illegal lobbying, their falsified environmental reports, the pressure they had put on local officials. It was a meticulously compiled case against them. The second item was another letter. I unfolded it. The cursive was the same, but it seemed a little shakier, as if written with a sense of finality. "Leo," it began, "if you have found this, you have found my last will and testament, the real one. What you have in front of you is a choice. The money is yours. It's everything I managed to save and scrape together over the years, working odd jobs under a different name. It is clean. You can take it, disappear. Find a place where you can be happy and never think of this ruin on a hill again. No one would blame you. I would not blame you. It is, perhaps, the life I should have given you from the start. A clean break. That is your first choice, the easy choice." I looked at the cash on the table. A clean break. It was so tempting. I could be on a bus, a plane, by tomorrow. I could leave the group home, the memories, the ghost of my grandfather and his forgotten fight, all behind me. I could be a new person. But there was a second page. "But there is another choice," the letter continued, "the harder one. The documents in this envelope are the truth. They are proof of what Apex Development is trying to do to this valley, to this community. They are a weapon. But a weapon is useless without a soldier to wield it. The money is also yours to use for this purpose. It is enough to pay the back taxes. It is enough to hire your own lawyers, your own surveyors. It is enough to begin to bring this farm back to life, to show them that this land is not abandoned. It is enough to fight. I cannot ask you to take up my fight. It is not your burden. I left you once to protect you from a fight you didn't choose. I will not, even in death, force you into another one. But I want you to know that this land, this home, it has a right to exist. Your grandmother poured her soul into this soil. I poured my life into protecting it. It is a place of good, honest work, a place of deep roots. It is a home, Leo. If you choose to fight for it, you will not be fighting for a piece of dirt. You will be fighting for them, for me, for yourself." He ended the letter with a simple, devastating line. "Whatever you choose, know that I am proud of the man you have become. Your loving grandfather, Arthur." As I finished reading, my cheap phone buzzed on the table, a jarring, modern sound in the ancient silence. I looked at the screen. It was Ms. Albright. I picked it up, my mind a whirlwind of choices and consequences. "Leo," she said, her voice formal, "I'm calling with an official offer. Apex Development is prepared to offer you $250,000 for the property. They will absorb all tax liabilities. It's a clean offer. All you have to do is sign. Given the state of the property, it's my legal opinion that this is a very generous offer." $250,000. It was a fortune. But I looked at the table. The cash sitting there was probably half that, maybe more. And the documents, they were priceless. I looked around the dusty room, at the ghost of a life that had been lived here. I looked out the window at the dead vines, and for the first time, I didn't see a graveyard. I saw a field waiting to be reborn. I thought of the man who chose to be a villain in my story to protect me. The man who worked for years in lonely exile, saving every dollar, not for himself, but to give me a choice. The easy choice or the harder one. A clean break or a chance to put down roots. In that moment, the choice wasn't hard at all. It was the only one I could possibly make. "Ms. Albright," I said, my voice clearer and stronger than I had ever heard it before. "Thank you for the call. The answer is no. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Leo, are you sure? This is a significant amount of money." "I'm sure," I said, looking at my grandfather's last letter. "The property is not for sale." Hanging up the phone felt like closing one door and opening another. The silence that rushed back in wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with purpose. The weight of the no was heavy, but it was a good weight, like a heavy tool that fits perfectly in your hand. I had made a choice, not just about the land, but about who I was going to be. I was not the boy who ran. I was the man who stayed. The task ahead was monumental, almost absurdly so. I was an 18-year-old kid with no skills, no experience, standing in a derelict house on 40 acres of dead farmland. But I had two things my grandfather didn't have at the end: resources and the truth. I spent the rest of that day taking stock. I bundled the cash back into the ammo can and hid it again, this time in a different, more secure spot I had found in the cellar. I laid the documents out on the table, trying to make sense of my grandfather's meticulous notes, his maps of water tables, his highlighted legal statutes. It was overwhelming, but it was a start. The first practical step was survival. The house was unlivable. I decided to focus on one room. I chose a small downstairs room off the kitchen, maybe a pantry or a study once. It had one window that wasn't boarded up, just grimy. I spent the next 3 hours cleaning it. I found a broom in the shed and swept away the thick carpet of dust. I found rags and used water from a rusty outdoor spigot to wipe down the walls and the floor. The water ran brown. It was grueling, dirty work. Every muscle in my body ached, but with every swipe of the rag, I felt like I was clearing away not just a decade of neglect, but a lifetime of my own uncertainty. I was claiming the space, making it mine. By nightfall, the room was clean. It was still empty and bare, but it was clean. I brought my duffel bag in and unrolled my sleeping bag on the floor. It wasn't much, but it was 1,000 times better than a bus station bench or a bunk in a group home. It was my room, in my house. Before I went to sleep, I made a call. "Ms. Albright," I said when she answered. "It's Leo Martinez." "Leo," she said. Her tone was different now. The professional crispness was still there, but it was layered with curiosity. "I was surprised by your decision." "I found some things here," I said, being intentionally vague. "Things my grandfather left for me. I'm staying. I'm going to pay the back taxes, and I'm going to fight Apex." There was a long pause. "I see," she said slowly. "That is a bold move. Apex is not a company that likes to be told no." "I have his research," I said. "Documents. I think he was building a case against them. I need you to look at it, and I need help. I need to find someone who knows about vineyards, someone who can tell me if this land is salvageable. And I need a contractor, someone local and trustworthy who can help me make this house livable." She was silent for another moment. I could hear her thinking. "Your grandfather was a client of my father's many years ago," she said finally, her voice softer. "My father always said Arthur Vance was a stubborn, honorable man. It seems he was right." "All right, Leo. Send me copies of what you found. I'll look them over. And I'll make some calls. There's an old-timer in town, a man named Gus. He runs the general store. His family has been here forever. If anyone knows the land and the people, it's him. I'll ask him to stop by." The next morning, I walked the 3 miles back into town. The journey felt different. I wasn't an aimless drifter anymore. I was a resident. I had a destination and a purpose. I walked into the general store, a bell tinkling above the door. The place smelled of sawdust and coffee. A man with a gray beard and a weathered face looked up from behind the counter. It was the same man who had driven past me in the pickup truck. "Can I help you?" he asked, his eyes appraising me. "I'm Leo Martinez," I said. "I'm staying at the old Vance place." His expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Recognition. "Heard someone was up there," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Ms. Albright called. Said you were Arthur's grandson." "Yes, sir." "I'm Gus," he said, wiping his hand on his apron before offering it to me. His grip was like iron. "Your grandfather was a good man, hard-headed as a mule, but a good man." That small acknowledgement, that simple statement of respect for a man I'd never known, felt like a validation of my choice. I bought a few supplies: bread, peanut butter, a lantern, batteries. As Gus was ringing me up, he paused. "That land's got good bones," he said, looking at me intently. "But it's been asleep a long time. It'll take more than one pair of hands to wake it up." It wasn't a warning, it was a statement of fact. And maybe, just maybe, it was an offer. I just nodded. "I know. I'm just starting with one room." He gave a short, gruff nod and pushed the bag of groceries toward me. "Welcome home, kid," he said. The days that followed fell into a rhythm of hard physical work. In the morning, I'd work on the house. I pried the boards off the windows, letting the sunlight stream into the dusty rooms for the first time in a decade. I swept, I scrubbed, I carried out load after load of trash and debris. The house began to breathe again. In the afternoons, I would tackle the land. The dead vineyard was an overwhelming sight, a tangled mess of gray wood and thorny weeds. I started in one corner, with a pair of rusty shears and a handsaw from the shed. I cut away the dead vines, pulling them down from their trellises, stacking them in large piles to be burned. It was slow, back-breaking labor. My hands, soft from years of institutional life, were quickly covered in blisters and scratches. My muscles screamed in protest every night. But with every vine I cut, I felt a sense of clearing, of making way for something new. I wasn't just clearing a field, I was clearing a space for a future. A few days later, Gus, the store owner, drove up the dirt road in his old pickup. He got out and looked around, his eyes taking in the small pile of cleared vines and the newly uncovered windows of the house. He just grunted. "Figured you could use this," he said, pulling a newer, sharper pair of pruning shears and a sturdy leather work belt from the back of his truck. "My son's. He's got no use for 'em in the city." He handed them to me. "Thanks," I said, genuinely touched. "Don't mention it," he grumbled, already turning to leave. "Just don't cut your hand off." It was a small gesture, but it felt huge. It was the first thread of connection to this place, to this community that I hadn't even met yet. I wasn't just the strange kid at the end of the road anymore. I was Arthur Vance's grandson, and I was trying. That seemed to matter here. That evening I sat on the porch steps, the new shears resting beside me. The porch still sagged, the paint was still peeling, but it felt different. It felt like my porch. I watched the sun set behind the western ridge, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple. The air grew cool, and the scent of the redwoods deepened. I thought about my grandfather. I imagined him sitting on this same porch, watching this same sunset, worrying about his daughter, about his land, about me. I felt a profound connection to him, a sense of shared legacy. He had passed on to me not a burden, but a purpose. He had given me a home, not a perfect, finished home, but the raw materials of one, the land, the choice, the fight. He had trusted me to build the rest myself. Inheritance, I was beginning to realize, wasn't about what you were given. It was about what you chose to do with it. You could cash it in, or you could build on it. You could run from the story, or you could choose to write the next chapter. I looked out at the rows of skeletal vines stretching up the hill. They didn't look dead to me anymore. They looked like potential. They looked like a promise. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. My story isn't really about inheriting a vineyard. It's about inheriting a choice. For so long, I had no choices. My life was a series of rooms I was placed in, rules I was given, and futures that were predicted for me. And they were all small. When I found that box, I thought the money was the inheritance. I thought the land was the inheritance. But I was wrong. The real inheritance was the choice my grandfather gave me, the choice to run, or the choice to build, the choice to be a victim of my past, or the author of my future. He didn't give me a home. He gave me the chance to earn one. And that gift is more valuable than any amount of money or land. Home isn't a place you are given. It's a place you create. You create it with your work, with your choices, with your willingness to fight for it. It doesn't matter if you're starting with a broken-down farmhouse or a tiny apartment, or just a dream in your heart. The act of building is what makes it yours. The act of choosing to stay, to care, to commit. That's what turns a property into a home. So I want to ask you, what are you building? It doesn't have to be a house. It can be a career, a family, a community, a better version of yourself. We all start with a broken-down piece of something, but we all have the choice to fix it, to clear away the weeds and let the sun in. If these stories, these ideas of second chances and building something from nothing mean something to you, I hope you'll subscribe and become part of this community. We're all just trying to find our way home, and it's a little easier when we walk that road together. Share your story in the comments. Tell us about a time you chose the harder right over the easier wrong. Tell us what you're building, because your story matters, your fight matters, and you are not alone.